Coming up, the murder of PC Sharon Beshanevsky. A man appears in court after being extradited from Pakistan. Guilty of gross misconduct for sending racist, homophobic and disableist messages. 8 former and serving Met police officers. And the fashion legend designer Dame Mary Quant has died. The murder of PC Sharon Beshanevsky. 18 years after she was shot dead on the job, a man appears in court. The mother of 3 had only been an officer for 9 months when she was killed after being called to reports of a robbery in Bradford. A 75-year-old man extradited from Pakistan appeared in court in London today. Also this lunchtime, guilty of gross misconduct. 8 serving and former Met police officers who shared sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic and disableist messages, including about Katie Price's son. Strike UK, how industrial action has hit the UK economy. And the queen of the miniskirt and the 60s, the fashion designer Dame Mary Quant, has died.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. 18 years after Police Constable Sharon Beshanevsky was shot dead after responding to reports of a robbery in Bradford, a man has appeared in court after being extradited from Pakistan, charged with her murder. 74-year-old Pirandita Khan appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court in central London this morning and was told his case will be sent to the Old Bailey. PC Beshanevsky had only been a police officer for 9 months when she was killed in 2005. This report from Nick Wallace.
Arrested in Pakistan 3 years ago and finally extradited to Britain on Tuesday this week. Pirandita Khan arrived at Westminster Magistrates Court in London this morning to be charged with the murder of Police Constable Sharon Beshanevsky nearly 18 years ago. There's been an outstanding warrant for his arrest since 2006. PC Beshanevsky had only been on the force for 9 months when she was shot dead by a gang raiding a travel agent's in Bradford. She had 2 hours left on her shift before she was due to go home for her youngest daughter's 4th birthday party. Beshanevsky's colleague, PC Teresa Milburn, was also shot during the raid and suffered severe injuries. The shootings caused outrage and a determined effort by the police to bring those responsible to justice. After a series of arrests, Yusuf Jama and Muzaka Shah were found guilty of Sharon Beshanevsky's murder in 2006. In 2009, Jama's younger brother Mustaf became the 3rd person convicted of her murder. And just over a decade later, the alleged mastermind of the raid, Pirandita Khan, was arrested in Pakistan. He'd been on the run for more than 14 years. Today, Brian Booth, the chairman of the West Yorkshire Police Federation, said, "My colleagues within West Yorkshire are delighted to hear about the arrest and will now be watching closely the wheels of justice turning in this case." Sharon Beshanevsky's murder left 3 children without a mother. It devastated a family and a community. Nothing will be able to replace her, but the decades-long effort to bring those suspected of her killing to justice are a fitting tribute to her service and sacrifice. Nick Wallace, ITV News.
Let's go live now to Westminster Magistrates Court and join our correspondent Geraint Vincent, who was at that appearance. Take us through what happened this morning.
Well, Pirandita Khan appeared before a district judge at Westminster Magistrates Court here just after 10 o'clock. This morning he was wearing a dark tracksuit top and he was walking with a limp as he made his way to the front of the dock to confirm his name and his date of birth, which was October the 13th, 1948. The court was reminded that prior to his extradition he was arrested in Pakistan in 2020, and as well as the murder charge he was charged with 5 other counts, one of robbery, a quantity of cash from that travel agency in Bradford, 2 counts of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life, and 2 counts of possession of prohibited weapons, a machine gun and a 9mm pistol. It was a short hearing in which there was no application for bail, and the judge directed that Piran Khan appear before the Central Criminal Court here in London on Monday.
Geraint Vincent, thank you. 8 serving and former Metropolitan Police officers have been found guilty of gross misconduct for sending sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic and disableist comments on a WhatsApp group. The messages sent and shared by 7 men and 1 woman included comments making fun of Katie Price's son, Harvey. The panel found the most senior ranking officer in the group, a former Sergeant Luke Thomas, appears to have been one of the most active participants in the group. Martha Fairley joins me now. The content of some of these messages is simply too offensive for us to talk about to broadcast right now.
Yes, absolutely. Given the determination of the panel at the hearing this morning, the legal chair, Christopher Mackay, described the WhatsApp messages concerned, as he said, discriminatory, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, disableist or otherwise offensive and inappropriate, and often using very vulgar language. They'd been sent over a period of just over 2 years between 2016 and 2018 in a WhatsApp group of which the 7 male and 1 female officer were all members. Now, only 2 of those officers are still serving in the Met. The messages included derogatory remarks about Harvey Price, who is the son of celebrity Katie Price. He suffers from autism and Prader-Willi syndrome and is partially sighted. And one post made by Officer B, who's still serving and has been granted anonymity during this case, was described as a significant breach of the standard of equality and diversity, inappropriate and offensive to Harvey Price, and that it constituted gross misconduct. Other derogatory posts made included offensive comments about the appearance of a fellow officer. And the panel found that former Sergeant Luke Thomas, who was the most senior ranking member of the group, was amongst the most active participants, mocking the weight of Harvey Price, also joking about naming his dog after German concentration camps from the Second World War or after notorious child killers. And when he should have been closing down the WhatsApp group, in fact, he was one of its main contributors.
Martha, what happens now to the 2 members of the group who are still serving, still working for the Met?
Well, only PC Glyn Rees and Officer B are still serving, but in cases of gross misconduct, dismissal without notice is an option. The panel has to determine the appropriate sanctions in this case that should be taken, considering the seriousness of the misconduct, any mitigating factors and the harm caused. So they'll also look at the impact this has on public confidence and on the reputation of the Met as a whole.
Martha Fairley, thank you very much. Thank you. A winter of strike action has hit the UK economy. There was no growth in February, blamed in part on industrial action staged by some teachers and members of the civil service. The new figures do show the country narrowly avoided dipping into a recession, with the Chancellor saying the economic outlook is looking brighter than expected. But Labour said the UK was lagging behind the global stage. Here's our political correspondent, Harry Horton.
As strikes by civil servants, teachers and rail workers grew this winter, the UK economy stood still. Walkouts by public sector workers acted as one of the biggest drags on GDP in February, as the UK narrowly avoided a recession.
Well, the economy has shown no growth really for the last 3 years, and I think that's what it's really important to focus on. The numbers month by month have been bouncing up and down a little bit, but what I think we're seeing reasonably consistently is that the economy is stagnating, hasn't grown in the last year, doesn't look like it's going to grow much in the next year, and that's really pretty bad news for all of us.
Growth of 0.4% in January surprised some economists, but the UK saw no growth in February overall. And the picture could have been worse, were it not for a strong performance by the construction sector. But some in this industry say there are issues on the horizon.
It's having a huge impact because not only is the economy flatlining, but we have a shortage of skills, we have increasing material prices. You know, in the construction industry, we've just been battered. You can't constantly have issues where labour prices are going through the roof. There's a skills shortage, interest rates are going up, material prices are going up, but house prices are falling.
Labour says the UK is lagging behind other countries.
Well, we're rock bottom at the moment. We're rock bottom of the G7. We're the lowest performing of the G7, and it's not good enough. And, you know, as we're seeing the cost of living bite, for most working people of this country. That does affect our economy as well.
The government has pledged to get the economy growing this year.
There is more we need to do. That's why Jeremy Hunt's budget just a few weeks ago was a budget for growth, and it's why the government is taking action to reduce inflation, particularly helping people with their household energy bills at what is a difficult time. Without that support package in place, people's residential energy bills would be about double what they currently are.
The UK may have avoided a recession for now, but the government knows weak or no growth is unlikely to impress voters. Harry Horton, ITV News.
Let's get some reaction from our economics editor, Joel Hills. No growth, but no recession. What do you make of these latest figures?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that the ONS has looked through the historic data and calculated that actually the UK economy has returned once again to its pre-pandemic size. It calculates that the UK economy in February of this year was 0.3% higher than it was in February 2020, the month before the UK went into lockdown. It's taken 3 years, as Paul Johnson was saying there, to get here. But it is a milestone of sorts, and the direction of travel is encouraging. The second thing to say, as of course the government has been reminding us, is a technical recession has been avoided. Go back just 6 months, Nina. Let's remember the Bank of England was saying last November that it thought we were into 2 years of uninterrupted negative growth. It just hasn't happened. The Chancellor, by the way, back then agreed. Now he's saying the economic outlook is brighter. We're set to avoid a recession thanks to a massive package of cost of living support. This feels like fair comment. Taxpayer support does look like it's been very effective at cushioning households and businesses from the pain of high inflation and higher interest rates. But let's note too, Paul Johnson, absolutely right, the big picture is extremely weak. The economy's barely grown since May last year, contracting in some months, growing in others. And the fourth thing, as Labour's pointing out, is compared to the likes of Japan, France, the United States, our recovery from COVID looks pretty feeble.
Joel Hills, thank you very much. Thank you. The latest NHS figures show hospital waiting times have hit a new record high. More than 7 million people are now waiting for routine treatment across England, up by 100,000 in just 1 month. Ambulance response times have also gone up. And those numbers don't take into account the strikes last month and this week by junior doctors. Our deputy political editor, Anushka Asthana, is at King's College Hospital in South London. Anushka, a really challenging time for the NHS still for patients.
A really challenging time. On top of the figures that you just read out, we found out today that 1 in 10 people turning up to major A&Es are in there for over 12 hours. The target is 4. Now, there was some good news. The longest waiting list, people waiting over 18 months, have come down slightly, and that is what the medical director of the NHS was focusing on today.
Well, despite the busiest winter that we've seen for our emergency services, the ongoing effects of COVID, and of course periods of repeated industrial action, we have been making good progress on the COVID backlog, and of course we have a particular focus on our long waiters. But inevitably these periods of strike action will have an impact that we are likely to see in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, what sort of impact are we expecting from that strike action?
I mean, a very big impact. I sometimes think the word junior for these doctors is misleading. We're talking about pretty much every doctor apart from consultants. 80% of them are out today here at King's College Hospital. They've cancelled 600 non-emergency operations. That's pretty much almost all of them, and 6,000 outpatient appointments. I've just stood in an operating theatre that should be a hive of activity, taking people off those waiting lists. It was completely empty here and all over the country. And while the hospitals are focusing on emergency care, the CEO of this hospital trust was very clear to me, delaying operations can be dangerous too.
We've almost gone back a little bit to where we were with COVID, where all we did was cope with the acute care. But in terms of elective, we didn't do that, and we know that caused harm to patients down the line. And make no mistake, you know, there are patients who have cancer having delays in their treatment. We're delaying the possible diagnosis of cancer in patients. This is having real harm, and as a consequence, it's really, really important that both parties get around the table.
The problem is, right now, it feels like junior doctors and the government are very far apart.
Anushka, thank you very much. Thank you. Next this lunchtime, a large-scale security operation is in place across Dublin as the US president is in town. It is Joe Biden's second day in the Republic of Ireland, having spent a short time in Northern Ireland to mark 25 years since the Good Friday peace agreement. Today's visit includes meetings with Ireland's political leaders. Rachel Younger is in the city. A warm welcome from the Irish president and the Irish public.
Yeah, that's right. I think the size of the president's motorcade, and I counted over 40 separate vehicles today, has only been matched by the warmth of that welcome from President Michael D. Higgins. They are two men, of course, in their 80s who bonded in the past over their love of poetry and dogs, and they looked utterly at ease with each other, incredibly relaxed. Quite a contrast, I think, to that very brief, rather stilted meeting with Rishi Sunak yesterday. And I think just watching them, although there was so much pomp and ceremony involved in that welcome, the tone of it felt rather more like somebody coming home to meet an old friend. And I think that level of intimacy and warmth is something you'll see repeated later today when President Biden meets with the Irish Prime Minister, or Taoiseach, a little later.
Rachel, the White House was forced to defend something the president said yesterday. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. The president was giving a brief speech in a pub in Dundalk, and he started talking about a distant relative and an international former Irish rugby player who he described as having beaten the Black and Tans. Now, he meant the All Blacks, the New Zealand international rugby side. The Black and Tans were actually brought in to help put down revolution in Ireland in the 1920s and had a fairly nasty reputation. So it was awkward. It might underline the thought of some of those in the north that this is a president who is too pro-Irish. But the White House was keen to say it was just a slip of a tongue. That was clear from the context of the speech. I think the truth is this is a president whose Irish identity is simply incredibly important to him.
Rachel Younger in Dublin, thank you very much. Thank you. A body has been found washed up on a beach near Brighton this morning after a search operation during the heavy winds of Storm Noah. Coast Guard, helicopters and lifeboats were involved in the rescue effort, which began yesterday afternoon. Storm Noah caused havoc across England and Wales, with 75-mile-per-hour gusts of wind leaving hundreds of properties without power. And Premier League clubs have collectively agreed to withdraw gambling sponsorship from their matchday shirts. This makes them the first sports league in the UK to take measures to voluntarily reduce gambling advertising. The Queen of swinging 60s fashion, Dame Mary Quant, has died aged 93. Her family has just released a statement saying the British designer died peacefully at her Surrey home this morning. I'm joined by Rishi Davda. What a life, what a lasting contribution to British fashion and indeed the world over.
Very much so, and it's incredibly sad news this lunchtime that Dame Mary Quant has passed away at the age of 93. Her influence in 60s fashion can't be underestimated, not just in making miniskirts mainstream, but also in bringing fashion to the masses. She was brought up in London, the daughter of two Welsh school teachers who, interestingly enough, didn't want her to take a fashion course. And I think at the time they had no idea the designer she would go on to become, setting up her first store, Bazaar, in 1955. And her empire from there just grew and grew. Her fashion ethos very much about being playful, having fun. At the time, she wasn't concerned with making clothes for the elites, but actually catering to everybody. She was one of the first female designers in what was a very male-dominated industry. She was made a dame back in 2015, 50 years after taking the fashion world by storm. And paying tribute, Alexandra Shulman, the former editor-in-chief of British Vogue, called Mary a leader of fashion, but also in female entrepreneurship, a visionary who was much more than just a great haircut. She was known for her trademark bob. Like I said, incredibly sad news this lunchtime. Her family confirming in a statement that Mary died peacefully at her home in Surrey.
Thank goodness she followed her passion all those years ago. Rishi Davda, thank you very much. Thank you. Finally, this lunchtime, the 8-year mission to find out if there's life on Jupiter's largest moons is going to take a little longer than first planned. Liftoff at Europe's spaceport in French Guiana has been delayed by 24 hours due to a risk of lightning strikes. The JUICE spacecraft is destined to be the first ever to orbit a moon on a different planet to Earth. The European Space Agency is behind the £1.4 billion project. The craft will travel more than 500 million miles. Its mission to determine whether there could be signs of life on the ice-encrusted moons of Jupiter. It's due to eventually reach orbit in 2031. It'll unfurl 10 giant solar panels and a boom pole carrying instruments to measure its surroundings. That's it from me. Bye-bye.
There'll be some light cloud early on today, but by lunchtime it will almost certainly clear. Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise sponsors ITV National Weather.
A very good afternoon to you. Lively weather today, keeping us on our toes once more with blustery winds, some spells of springtime sunshine, but also some showers and longer downpours interrupting the blue skies. This is the earlier satellite and radar picture. A good deal of cloud across northern Britain, a little brighter further south. And for all of us, showers and longer downpours charging their way at quite a pace from west to east in keen and blustery westerly winds. And some of these downpours will be prolonged and intense, with rumbles of thunder, the chance of some hail in places, and in between spells of sunshine, lifting temperatures to 13 or 14 degrees. But where we've got the blustery wet weather, a little cooler than we'd expect given the time of year. And those showers continue across the north and the east to end the day. Longer downpours overnight for parts of Scotland and western Britain, with some steadier rain into the south come dawn. Elsewhere, clearer and a little chillier come the small hours. Some low temperatures to start the day in places.
Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise sponsors ITV National Weather.